See, I'm not a fan of the movie. I'm literally the only person in the world who's not a fan of the movie.
Um, the movie for me falls into this weird category, which the other movies do. I far I love the movie when I am not in the act of watching the movie.
Yeah, that is weird.
Like no, it's like remembering the movie. My brain edits out all those like the moments just went on a little too long or they were kind of mumbling. You know, it's like I remember it very rose colored and I love it. But when I'm watching it, it's like my God, this is slow. My God, this is thing. And then of course, yeah, the film historian in me like the Riker Hauer stuff. Yeah, but yeah, I've got a lot of movies that like I don't like the act of watching the film. But I love the movie. Looking back on it,
That's like when I watch comedy with my wife. She'll sit there. I'll be roaring with laughter like it's a Bill Burr special, and she'll be sitting there going. And then afterwards, she'll go, "Oh, do you remember that bit?" And I'm like, "You literally sat there with a deadpan face throughout the entire thing." She'll go, "Oh, I was laughing on the inside." So was it Rune Quest you were talking about? The
Yes,
new version?
yes, yeah.
See, because I wanted to touch upon that because as a long-term Rune Quest player, I played the new edition. Do you want me to be honest
You've got to
about
be
what I
honest because
thought?
we're in playtest, so we need the hard discussion so we can like how to unscrew it.
Okay, I'll be honest. It was complicated in a different way. The whole point of that was meant to make the game less complicated and more accessible, and it was just complicated in a different way. I loved the idea of the packages, and I can cut this
No,
out
no,
if
go
you
for it.
want because of the NDA
No,
thing
it's
and
fine.
all that. I love the idea of the packages where you could play like an Orlanthi, or you could play Yelmalio. I played the Yelmalio, but the game confused me because the whole point of a different version or a kind of taster version, you might want to call it, is to make the game easier to understand. Now, I do appreciate that RuneQuest is a game. It's about lore, and it's always been about the lore. And luckily, the lore in RuneQuest is just out of this world good. You know, it's very rare to find a system or a game with that much lore. I mean, there's only a few, like Warhammer 40k, probably comparatively speaking, maybe Empire of the Petal Throne, things like that. And the problem, the lore brings out the worst in RuneQuest players, but they play it for the lore more than the game. I was hoping that it would be less deadly. In the first combat, I lost one of my legs.
you said you would prefer that over your arm.
That is true, but the thing is, when you yell a Malio spearman, it's hard to brace a spear with
Yeah.
one leg. I liked one thing. There were a few things I did like. I liked the fill-in-able character thing when they were generated at the end. That was super cool. I feel if you're going to do that kind of game, it has to simplify it more because you're trying to get in new
Yeah.
players. And then the idea being is you develop these two products side by side, and it's like D&D, AD&D. You want the more complex version, the one that's been around longer, then you play this. You want to get the taster, you play this. And as far as I'm concerned, we already had a simplified Rune Quest, which was 13th Age, which died to death because it wasn't supported
Yeah.
at all. So that's my general feelings on it, that it was no less complicated. And I expected it to be easier to play, and
Yeah.
it wasn't.
But yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. So and that's a lot of what we're doing right now is trying to refine and simplify. I mean, did you like the concept of the phases of the of combat, or is that
It was too
Yeah.
much. I didn't like it one bit. because it felt like Rune Quest trying to do another game.
Got it. Interesting.
Rather than Rune Quest being Rune Quest. Now I know you could argue, oh, that's just a grognard speaking. He's played Rune Quest for all these years. You could make that argument, but I was really open to the fact that we're going to get this new version of this game I love, and they're going to go after it and bring in a new audience who are going to write for it, all for all the right reasons. And it was just too hard. It was just too hard to wrap my head around. And maybe that's because my brain's addled with age.
It is so difficult to remove your inner grognard when the game that you love and like the back of your hand changes. Like that was my issue when like 3rd edition D&D came out, and everybody's like, it's simpler. It's like, Thaco is not difficult, you peasants. And then, I leave and I come back 15 years later, I'm like, what the hell? How did I do this rapidly through my brain, but still barely pass math classes?
You said you were a banker?
Yes. I also said I got laid off, so maybe, I don't know.
Okay, fair point.
I graduated college and immediately went to banking and finance, so I don't know math.
You don't need me. I don't see. But no, it's interesting because to touch on the grognard thing. Like, so I ran at not this past Gary Con, but the year before. I ran Old School Essentials. Ben Riggs got together a gaming group of just people who had only played 5th edition D&D. They had never played another role playing game, and we played Old School Essentials. And I was not even using Thaco. I had each of their character sheets. I had the little attack matrix. Like, here are the armor classes, and here's the number you need. And it was hilarious to see these 20-something gamers say, like, after we played, they had a lot of fun, but obviously part of it's the DMing and like hamming it up. And they're all actors, so they like getting into character. But afterwards, they're like, this is awesome. Like, I just had this table, and so I just rolled the die and just looked at the table. I didn't have to do any math. Like, this is so awesome. I love this combat system. And I thought it was so funny, like, because when you think of it from that perspective, like, I never would have thought of it that way because, obviously I'm looking at the entire table and running it. I'm like, yeah, that does make sense as like an individual player, just having a little table that's okay. Roll the 13. I hit armor class 6, right? Like, that's actually super fast and easy, right? Like, even though Thaco may be easier and it's more extensible in some ways, and this also kind of gets around to your comments about the system, right? Like, there are times when you're really deep into something and you can see this is simpler because it captures all of these use cases that I know of. But for the typical user, this is actually more complicated because they have figured out like their narrow slice of the system they've mastered, and now it's easy for them. The more generalized approach could actually throw people off. So to give you a little background, like the Rune Quest we're playtesting, instead of using strike ranks, which is this almost kind of action point system for initiative, it has phases. And so one thing I noticed when I played with strike ranks was that, and most GMs just kind of knew how strike ranks work. Like, they weren't actually spending all their time recalculating strike ranks. They're just like, well, you have a sword, so you can move, and on strike rank 6, you attack, and then that's your turn. Things like that. They weren't actually trying to go through and calculate the strike ranks. Because we have gotten pushback from people saying, oh, strike ranks are easier. It's like, well, if I read the rules, they're actually much harder. But the way you're using the rule is easier and simpler because you're just treating it as a number. No, but I'm not saying that's what you're doing, whatever. I don't know the specifics, but that's one of the things I think you have to keep in mind as a designer is that it doesn't matter like how awesome you think your game is. If people playing it are like, I tried using this and here's what happened, like that supersedes all the spreadsheets I could build and all the TED Talks I could give on how this is easier. It doesn't matter. Like, the user has to be like, oh, this is better. Like, so that's not what's happening. And we are at a case where with Rune Quest, we're still open to making lots of changes to it. I mean, that's one of the things I think.
Yeah.
We've just been a bit clogged up because we've had Gary Con and then we have Chaos Con next week, which I totally forgot about. I don't even have my flight booked yet. I don't even know how many days I can be there yet because we're also doing other stuff in life. So, but yeah, we're going to be doing a lot more changes. And I think you'll see at least one more iteration of the phases because I think there is a lot of like streamlining we can do around that. My goal with the phases is just to get people to understand that like the social phase is like a part of every combat round. So we want you to try talking to creatures. And so we're making some changes around that and so on. So we'll see where we end up. But yeah, I'm open to still, I don't know what Jeff would say, but I'm still open to making any changes to the game. So
fair point. I mean, feedback, negative feedback is, negative but constructive is always better than just saying your game's great.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when I was learning how to write in a writer's workshop, my favorite reviewer is the most savage to me.
Yeah.
Like if I want to be told it's great, I'll just give it to my mom.
Yeah.
But getting constructive, brutally honest feedback was gold. I mean, once you dry the tears, you're like, God damn it, they were right, yep. And then you fix it.
It's because I had this conversation when we had Kelsey on, because she was saying no one wants to tell her something's bad because she's Kelsey who designed Shadow Dark, and she gave me a copy. I was at Gen Con. She gave me a copy of Shadow Dark, and I said, if you've ever watched any videos on my channel, I'm brutally honest about what I think about something. I've told Delta Green guys that one of their scenarios wasn't very good, but they still promoted it because it was constructive criticism about why some things didn't make sense, or it's not. I'm not just prepared to blow smoke up people's asses, because ultimately, if I buy it, I can say what I like about it on a video. So there's no point in being anything but other than honest about it, because nobody learns anything if you lie.
Exactly.
But I've got a question about Rune Quest here. Actually, I think Seth's got it. It's one from Chulk G.
Let's see. Ooh, okay. Good, because see, I'm not the Rune Quest player, so maybe you guys will understand this question, because to me, it's words. So
I'll pretend to do.
From Chulk G. Hi, bud. Hi, Mr. Mills. How are you guys doing?
There's Mark. That's not the question. That's an easy.
That is the introduction.
Well. Next question.
I would like to know how the skill roll systems and the associates, like helping or augmenting, will be handled in this new edition. Thanks.
Yep.
Hugs from Brazil.
Oh, awesome. Brazil.
With an exclamation point.
Nice.
So it's an enthusiastic hug.
Yeah. So actually, I can give you a little bit of a preview. So, okay. So for context, in Rune Quest Gloranth, you have passions that are, the system is very similar to what you'll find in Pendragon, where passion is essentially something that drives your character. And it has a rating, a percentage rating. And sometimes the GM can ask you to roll against your passion to see, like, are you compelled to follow? So if you have an honor passion and someone challenges you to a duel, even though you know you're going to lose, you may like, well, I'm going to, I got to roll against my honor passion. Nope, my honor demands I will fight this person. Though I know the player knows it's a bad idea. The character doesn't think it's a bad idea because their passion is driving. So in Rune Quest, one of the things you can do with the passion is you can roll against it to try to give yourself a bonus to a check. But if you fail that check, you suffered like different consequences. Basically, you have like this crisis of your passion. So in the playtest, we just changed this. So in the first playtest draft, passions really weren't doing much because we weren't sure what to do with them. So we just kind of went ahead. We didn't want to use augments because it was adding a lot of die rolls to the game. And what would happen is players would just usually lean on their like 95% passion to to get a bonus. So it felt too mechanistic.
Yeah.
So instead, what we're doing now is when you, and this is not yet public, so it's new. You get to hear about this because some of the changes we're making. If you fail a roll, you can choose to invoke your passion and say, okay, I try to attack or I try to talk someone into this. No, this is really important to me. I'm going to invoke my passion. You can roll the check again. And instead of using your skill percentage, though, you use your passions percentage. And this is basically just you saying, hey, I'm drawing upon my passion to try to guide me because it's important. And you have to, obviously groups, this is a storytelling thing. Groups are going to vary, but the idea is you describe, oh, here's how my passion pushes me forward to try to overcome this obstacle. And so you get to basically push the roll. And just like in Call of Cthulhu 7th edition, where you can push your roll, you can re-roll, but if you fail, like bad things happen to you, we're now having that channel then through your passion. And so the idea is to give the GM some more guidance. So like, let's say I'm attacking someone, I have a hatred, like it's troll, and I miss. So I'm going to use my hatred of trolls to push this roll. Well, the GM might say is, okay, but if you like fail this roll, like it's now a fight to the death. Like your hatred is just going to overwhelm you. You can't stop attacking this troll. So if you fail, like your passion basically overcomes you. So the idea is to then give you a way you can push a roll and introduce a plot twist or a complication into your life of a failure, but attaching that to your passion. So basically showing, hey, here's how your passion is getting you into trouble. So when you choose to invoke your passion, it helps you when it turns a failure into success because you rolled successfully, or the consequence of a second failure can be, oh, now my passion's going to get me into trouble. I have to follow it to maybe a self-destructive event, or it's going to cause a complication for the party. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're positioning now, is using them as very similar to COC 7's push mechanic, except channeling it through the passion. And hopefully if it's working, because I've run into this when I've run Call of Cthulhu, sometimes a player will go to push something and like, oh, I'm not really exactly sure, like on a failure, like what's the catastrophic thing that could happen. So like, I mean, not to the point where I'm like, there's anything wrong with the mechanic, but we're hoping like, oh, it'll give you a bit more texture on that. So if there is a double failure, it's like, oh, okay, now this is what happens next. You're going to get yourself into trouble somehow. So
how often can you do that?
So the idea we in the rules right now, you can do that once per session per passion. So assuming a session essentially represents like a day of adventuring. So to get it down to like nitty gritty, we would say like once per day. So so you have to be a little careful when you want to use it, because you can use it only when you fail. Though it should be pretty powerful. Like, oh, this is a really important role. I'm willing to risk it, so I want to go ahead. The prior rule gave you a bonus for an entire scene, and that was also the thing, is it was very powerful. And so my experience playing with it just became like, well, we're in a really tough fight, so everyone use your best passion now to get plus 20, like your attack skill or something. So, and hopefully it makes it a little more versatile too, because you can kind of use it whenever you're rolling the dice, whenever you're making a D100.
Yeah, because it's a bit of a hyper enabler otherwise, isn't it? Yeah. Because you could have the character with no talkie skills for an entire scene, using their air affinity at 95% to make all the rolls of 5%.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just for one check. Yeah. Plus, then the idea is, since when you use one passion, then you can't use that one. You have to use maybe your lower ranking passions. So then there's higher risk of like, you might have like an air affinity at 95, but then your second highest one might be like 75 for the truth or something like that. And then your third one would be 65. So it's like, okay, I've already used 2. Do I really want to push my roll with a 65% skill? Maybe I have to, because this is like my one chance to pull myself out of trouble. So hopefully then it also kind of leads to some interesting tension. Make those passions really part of your character. So,
because did you play Rune Quest before you joined Chaosium?
A bit, actually. I started playing it when I first, shortly before I joined, I started playing the game. So get used to playing the game and kind of know what I was getting into.
Do you view the lore as a cross it has to bear or a petard to stand on?
Oh, I think it's something to stand on, 100%. So one of the things, and Seth, actually, you played Rune Quest at GameWorld, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, we did some play tests at your room.
So one of the things we're doing is trying to, I like to call it like translating it from Gloranthan anthropology to like pop culture D&D references. So one of the things that I'll do when I run into people who haven't played before, they know nothing about Gloranthan, I start by telling them, okay, this is a world that's similar to the world of Conan the Barbarian, in that you are an adventurer and you feel comfortable like a 1-on-1 fight or a 2-on-1 fight. But as soon as it's 3-on-1, now you're in danger. So that's kind of our system stakes. And then the setting is a setting where you are the member of a cult dedicated to a deity, and your goal is to progress from being an initiate of the D&D, like learning their magic, to eventually embodying their magic as a rune lord and taking on more and more aspects of the deity, until eventually you will Rune Quest and literally follow in the footsteps of the gods and become a capital H hero, a quasi-divine being. And so leading into that is, that's the structure of adventuring. Like, here's your power curve, like your journey. And I always like, and we're setting this version of Quest, because we're going to keep Rune Quest Gloranthan, the current version, around, like, because we see these as complementary games. So we're focusing on a region of the world called New Pavis in the Big Rubble. So it's like, here's your frontier town with like thieves and different factions, and then here's Big Rubble, this giant ruin. And I love like kind of going through the story of like, okay, so Pavis was the city. And this guy, Pavis, like, he went and found this giant statue that like existed before time began, and he figured out a way to like command it, and he used it to conquer the city, and the pieces of the statue, when it was destroyed, were used to build the city, and Pavis now has a cult. He was a guy, he was an adventurer like you, and like, this is how he progressed, and things like that, to like make it more relatable. Because I think that's the thing that makes Rune Quest interesting, is like kind of going back to the roots of like, okay, when this game first started out with like cults of terror and stuff, like let's roll it back to that. And like the way the cults are presented in the playtest version, where it's very much like, here's what your character thinks about the world, here's what the cult taught you, here's why you may have followed it, trying to make it very actionable, rather than like trying to explain the entire world all at once. Like, no, let's just explain this one piece. And here's the Lunar Empire. Well, they used to occupy this city, and now they are working in secret to retake it. And we know the Lunars could be playable, and some people think of them as the good guys, but like, for purposes of our point of view in presenting to you this game, we're casting them as the villains. It's more complicated than that, because this is the 21st century. We're used to thinking that way. But for purposes of playing in Big Rubble, they are the subversive agents trying to overthrow the city and retake it, things like that. So giving people just like that surface element, enough for them to function within this specific context without contradicting anything, that is in the wider world. So in this case, like, you're playing Orlanthe characters who are naturally enemies of the Lunars. So this is what your characters would think of the Lunars. But the Lunars would think you guys are undisciplined barbarians. So that's, if we did a Lunar expansion, we would just reverse it, right? Like, no, you're the good guys, and here's why. Things like that.
One of the problems with a lot of RPG lore now is the older players are grognards, whether whatever game it is. They were introduced to the lore when it could all be held in a pamphlet.
Yeah.
And then they were there as every additional pamphlet came out. And now, 40 years later, it's this giant tome. And so when a new player comes in, they're handed this, a school book of lore, and it's something like this. Like, I don't need that. So I like the idea that it's like, we're going to bring it back to the pamphlet, and then they'll play it and they'll enjoy it. And then the curious can explore that little bit more and that little bit more, but they're not having that feeling of like, there's so much lore here. I feel like I have to memorize a 400-page book before my hero can go kick this person's ass.
Yeah.
And screw that. I'll go play D&D instead. And that's how I think a lot of the lore heavy games feel for new players is the people that love the lore forgot that they themselves only started with a couple paragraphs that were kind of hastily jotted in the back of some tiny little book at one point, because that's all there was at the time.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's funny because, I mean, grognard in the UK has a different meaning to grognard in the US. And we have spoken to this. Grognards in the UK are not the kind of people who put down other people's game, and they're quite inclusive and want to play with other players. They've just been around a long time. And I did a video recently. I've been doing a set of lore videos for Rune Quest because, quite frankly, no one else is doing them. And there's some concepts in Rune Quest which are hard to explain. So I did one on this group called the God Learners, and they were, to kind of sum it up, they were powerful sorcerers that managed to hack the hero plane and mess around with the gods and move gods around and can affect change in the real world. I did this 10-minute video. The idea being is it's a 10-minute video quickly explaining who they were, what they did, and what happened to them. I got a response off someone that was twice as long as my script for the video.
Welcome to YouTube comments.
I was still reading it an hour later, all seized up and stiff. I was like, God, and I almost put the reply, you are the kind of problem that this game has. Who cares?
Yeah, no, it's the expert's dilemma. So like, one of the things that happens if you're an expert, being an expert and being a teacher are two very different things. And the thing with the expert is they don't necessarily know how to slice the information up to make it digestible. So when I work at Wizards, I worked in the Magic team for about 3 or 4 years, and I was working on an intro product, to teach people how to play Magic. And we had a big event where it was Lord of the Rings set had just released. So we had the employee event. Hey, come get some cards, make a deck, and play. So as part of my work, in my research, I set up a station right down next to the pizza, so people would see me. And it was come by the station. We will teach you how to play Magic. We'll teach you how to build a deck. And we had a whiteboard with 5 basic steps, like how to build your deck. It was like steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every beginning person who came by and saw those steps was like, oh man, that's a lot. And I'd have to be like, don't worry, I'll walk you through. Every experienced Magic players, especially the Magic players, like the game designers working on Magic, were like, oh, dude, you're missing like 30 steps. Like, this is so incomplete. And I'm like, that's the root thing is the expert knows all the detail. It's just they don't know how to dole it out in the digestible pieces to Seth's point, because they know they have it all up there. So they're constantly like, no, but this thing and this thing, but there's this exception. And you should think about this. And what if this happens? Well, but back in like 2012 with Ice Age or whatever it is, like this set, but that wouldn't make any sense. Like, and it's just, yeah. And I think that's one of the things that TTRPGs struggle with is how do you need a writer, you need the expert, but then you need the person who can translate that expertise into something that someone can learn, because they're two very different things.
So there's another Rune Quest one, which is one of your ones. I think it's the second to last one.
Let me see. Okay. So this, the one from Tuared?
That's it, yeah.
Okay, so this is from Tuared. What is the thinking behind the new Rune Quest? Is it just about making Rune Quest simpler and more beginner friendly, or specifically making it closer to D&D for people coming over from that game? More heroic, less deadly, for instance. And if this is the case, isn't there a risk of losing the specific appeal of Rune Quest? No amputations, so whatnot. When is it still Rune Quest?
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to balance is the idea of essentially. So I'll give you this is like the best case outcome, like where we've nailed it. It feels very Glorantha. It's the setting. Like this is one of our things, like in the Vision doc we wrote. Like okay, it's got to feel everything's going to be drawing on Glorantha. So that's why we're doing things like it's set in the city of New Pavis, which is right next to the Big Rebel, and the enemies are Chaos and the Lunar Empire. Like these are all, proper nouns taken from the setting. And then also thinking. So the way I like to think of it is, I want it conceptually to feel more like D&D and Pathfinder. Like I am in this frontier town and I go on adventures in the ruins. I go into dungeons and fight monsters and I get treasure and come back. But we then, want it to feel, because you could just do that D&D. So then why play BRP? Why play Rune Quest? Well, what I want is the feeling in Rune Quest of everyone is a named NPC. Unless you're fighting against a chaos monster, this is just like, just wants to destroy reality. You're dealing with someone who has their own passions, their own point of view. And so we'll see if this is working or not. But the idea is in the combat system, we have these phases. And this is a big change from BRP's combat system and RuneQuest combat system. But the idea is that we got this idea from the Doctor Who rule. So at the start of the round, everyone has a prep phase where it's stuff like draw a weapon, or cast spells like Blade Sharp. In RuneQuest, everyone uses magic. So warriors will cast spells to enchant their weapons, to enchant their armor. So we have the prep phase where you can just do that. We want you to do that because that's what makes this game different. Then there's the social phase where you have a chance to try to sway someone or talk to them. Because if you run into trolls, in D&D, a troll is just a big ravening monster. But in RuneQuest, trolls are people. They just happen, they have the darkness room. They lived in the underworld. And then in the mythic past, when the sun was killed and plunged into the underworld and brought light to darkness, they came to the surface. And so they have their own distinct culture. It can be antagonistic because they're essentially creatures of the night versus creatures of the day, but it doesn't have to be. So you might run into a troll and then you might be tense. You might want to fight, but then you might talk and figure out, okay, we can come to an agreement here or figure out what's going on and, whatever. Or I can scare you off with an intimidate check. So I always want you to think, okay, talking is always an option. And it's really you only want the characters who are good at talking. And then it's ranged attacks or ranged spells, movement, then close combat or close range spells. And the idea is then to make combat feel more tactical and more like, yeah, it is dangerous. You don't want to just recklessly charge into a mob of 6 guys because they will cut you down. So you have to be thinking a bit more like, okay, how can we have a nice defensive formation? How can we gang up and outnumber enemies while avoiding getting outflanked and things like that? So we have to be more thoughtful in how we fight. We don't just lean on our feats to just destroy things. If we are punching above our weights because we're using a lot of magic, I'm magically augmenting my armor, my weapons, because that's what characters in RuneQuest do. And that's what Glorantha is about. And if I'm really in trouble, I may use rune magic, which is essentially I'm going to take on an aspect of the gods to do something very powerful. But I have to then go back to my deity's temple and offer sacrifices and do rituals to get that back, because the gods don't just give out stuff because they like you. They give out stuff in return for stuff you give to them. So then double down on that. So hopefully it feels like D&D-ish and adventure structure. Like if you've written a D&D adventure, you can see how to write a RuneQuest adventure because it's kind of drawing on some of the same things you've done. But combat is a bit deadlier, and religion and this idea of your connection to the gods is much more important, is shining through. It's something you're thinking about a lot more than, say, a D&D character. The way I kind of would pitch it to D&D players is it's like, oh, you're all warlocks. You all have these pacts, and you all have to kind of think about how to keep this entity happy, because that's important. To gain their power and then sort of go up the power ladder. So that
was a good answer.
Thank you.
Actually,
no, I think this is
I do have a question.
Sure.
So this one is from Seth. So one of my thoughts whenever I do encounter a role playing game that's got a big world and lots of lore and everything's worked in, my first gut thought for some reason is, well, what if I want to have my world that I made up? How easy is it to port this game into that?
It depends on how magic rich your setting is. So the one big thing would be all the cults will be specific to Glorantha. So, but if you're willing to change some names and go like, okay, instead of like I have a storm god, so I'll use like my storm god instead of the Rune Quest storm god, you can do that. I think also if you just focus on the core system and the core skills and spirit magic, like that's the more common magic used round by round. Like you could pretty easily reflavor spirit magic as like, oh, I'm going to use my like extra defensive thing instead of it's being magic points. It's just like energy or endurance I'm spending. But I think you would have to like look at things like rune magic and how important that is, the cults, and it would take a little bit of work to disentangle it. So I think you would have to like, I think if you looked at the core combat system of the phases, oh, I really like this combat system and I really want to use this, then it's the juice is probably worth the squeeze. But if you're like, well, I could also just use D&D, like you might be better off using D&D because it's more generic.
Okay. So that's just always been, for whatever reason, my gut instinct whenever I see a game that is very linked to the world is like, well, I reject your world for no reason and I want to make my own. And
so this one is from Guy Milner. If you were to revise your classic feng shui scenario, Last Stand at Old Man Feng's for Feng Shui 2, what alterations would you make?
Oh, okay. So the biggest change I make to it is right now it was a convention scenario, so it's a little too linear.
Okay.
So I think I would want to, actually, if I remember right, so it all began with this idea. If you haven't seen this scenario, which I would be surprised we haven't. The joke of it is you are invited to a guy's funeral. He's kind of like an old master in feng shui terms. So he's, guy's probably been like a mentor at some point. And his son turns up, and his son's a total jerk. And he's like, thrown in with one of the bad guy factions. And so Old Man Fong like leaps out of his casket and like tries to strangle his son to death. Right. And that's the joke is he's not actually dead. He's faking it. And then I think after that, there's just a big long chase scene. So I think what I would try to do is add a little bit more meat to it. So it's not just like that funny scene and then hopefully funny. And then the big chase scene afterward. I think I'd want to add a little bit more to it. And I think I'd want to make the relationship between the father and son a little more actionable to the players. Because I think that's the biggest thing is, for a con game, it's kind of funny to have this thing. Like, it's just a con game. But for a campaign, it's kind of left fieldish. Like, okay, like, why do I really care about these two guys? Other than the fact it's kind of funny that the guy, pops up and it tries to lunge at his son. So I think that's what I'd want to do is play up more of that. And I think I'd want to make it a bit more, I'd want to flesh out a bit more of like who the son is working with and why that's interesting. So the players were maybe drawn into it ahead of time by like running into this like cabal they're dealing with. And, oh, here's just like, here's one of their victims, and they get to know him a little bit through investigation and stuff. Like, oh, here's what this guy was up to. Okay, we need to go to his funeral. Right, to try to figure out what he was up to, and then you're a bit more tied into it. Like maybe like the villain shows up, like, oh, they know this is the bad guy. Wait, why is he here? Right, and it's one of shock, and then compounded by Old Man Fun jumping out of the casket to attack his, to kick his son in the head. Right, like so yeah. That's what I think. The main thing I'd want to add is a bit more texture up front, so the players feel a bit more enmeshed into the story rather than seeing the story kind of happen.
Well, I hope that answers your question, guys.
Plus, like I am proud of myself for drawing in some core memories of a 26-year-old feng shui scenario. So,
feng shui 2, apparently.
No, it's for first edition, I think. They may have reprinted it for feng shui 2, but.
Oh, okay. That probably went.
Oh no, it was 2. It was the Atlas Games edition. Yeah, it was the first Atlas Games edition, which I think was the second edition. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I see. Memory's going a bit there, by the look of it. Do you want a question there, Sam?
Yes. This one is from Scott Jost. What is your personal white whale of game design? Something that you've always wanted to crack but haven't yet.
All right, so this is it's a very interesting question because I think I may have actually cracked it, but we're gonna see. So Ooh. I have been told, and like in talking to people, I think I believe this. I run very fast games. Like a lot happens in not a lot of time, especially with D&D 5th edition. Because I think part of it is I designed the game, so I tell people like, "Don't worry about that. Let's just keep moving." They believe me. It's like, "Oh well, you did play a singular role, so I guess I will trust you that we don't need to worry about these rules that are here." And so I was thinking a lot about like, how do I make games move faster without giving up anything, if anything, wanting to make them more fun. And so this is my solution. And again, go back to like, oh, this is the game I'm working on. It's my personal game I'm working on. So what I've started doing after some revising is, and I also stole this idea from Kelsey Dion from Shadow Dark. So I want to get more gaming in smaller spaces of time. Ideally, have like really satisfying 1 hour games. Warhammer has done this. They have formats for 40K and for Age of Sigmar. You can play a full battle in an hour. I think it's great. And that's really how I play Warhammer when I do get a chance to play. So what I realized in playing Shadow Dark was I went into it thinking, okay, there's a torch timer. Like, okay, I guess it's an hour. We'll see what happens. Whatever. I'll do it because I'm going to try playing this game straight. And it surprised me how seriously the players took it. Okay, where are we with our torch? Right? They kept asking and like, oh, we got to move ahead. We might run out of torches. And I'm just sitting there thinking like, guys, you got like 12 torches. They last an hour each. Like, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm like 50. I am not going to run a 12-hour dungeon crawl today, right? Like, I got to like leave in 2 hours to take my daughter to like, piano practice, right? But it was funny how just that pressure like kind of got the players to really start moving forward faster. So, and I playtested the ZagaryCon. I'm very happy with where it is, and maybe it'll end up to nothing, but so far so good. So I've introduced into my games this game system I'm working on. Every 10 minutes in real time, I roll a number of 6-siders, and for every 6, something bad happens. And so what happens is in the play, like the players are just like, okay, we got to move, right? Like it's even that, but even more like hyper focused. Now, I think once every 10 minutes is probably too much for like 4 hours of play. I think it worked at a con event because it was like, okay, here's this crazy, thing we're dealing with, and here's how everything's going. But I think there's something really there because it just worked so well to get the players to engage. And we played for like the full 4 hours, and the players afterwards like, oh, that was great. Like it was really tense and it was fun, and like we felt like one of the players said, and I thought this was such a great quote because I think it's one of the big problems I see in TTRPGs. It's like, we spent 5 minutes coming up with a good plan rather than spending 30 minutes coming up with a slightly better plan. And I'm like, yes, that is like so much my experience watching, running games, watching people like, okay, they have a basic good plan of like, okay, we need to grab this guy. Okay, great. Their basic plan will work. No, let's argue over the type of car we're going to use. Should it be a hatchback or gull wing? Oh, no, I think we should get a 4-door car. No, a 2-door car will be less blah, blah. And then the players argue for like 30 minutes and we're like, that doesn't, like, I don't even care. I'm not even going to like do anything. Like, this is irrelevant. But I don't want to tell the players like, look, guys, the car doesn't matter, because it's also like, well, then am I being too intrusive as the GM? Like, but what this does is it gets them to go, okay, we could spend 30 minutes arguing over which car and then hazard 3 of these event rolls. Or we could just go with, yeah, sure, station wagon. That works fine. Okay, 5 minutes. Let's do it, right? And it actually worked. And so the idea is like when I roll a 6, there are 2 basic ways that this thing can work. For each 6, I can either, and this is also inspired by Apocalypse World and powered by the Apocalypse games, I can essentially advance a front. So like in Dungeon World, the front is like a lingering long-term threat. So in this adventure I ran, one of the fronts was there's this pack of undead hounds. So the first time I advance it with a 6, like, oh, the hounds dig themselves up out of the garden. And you can hear them barking and baying and kind of wandering around the woods outside the castle. The second time I activate them with a 6, or if I get 2 6s, I can go straight to step 2. They basically surround the castle and don't let anyone interrupt. And on a 3, they start actively trying to hunt down intruders. So what's nice is there's natural narrative thing. We look out the window. Oh, you see these skeletal dogs now, like emerging from the garden, walking, howling and barking, and like, oh no, that's kind of creepy. And then, on the second one, like, oh, they've gone really quiet. Like you heard some barking, and now it's all quiet. Oh, I look outside. Oh, there's just the hounds have like perfectly encircled the castle. And they're all staring. Oh no, right? And then on 3rd, it's like they start barking, and now they're trying to get into the doors and windows and coming after them. Oh, great, right? It's so it worked really well because I was able to kind of establish these threats. There was like the hounds. There's another thing where if I roll a 6 when they're talking to the NPCs, another NPC could show up. It's like, great, on a 6, I roll a die, and now this guy shows up. Like he hears you talking and comes into the room and starts, talking to you and trying to like get you to help him out and stuff. So it just basically just meant every 10 minutes, if I rolled a 6, something happened to keep the plot moving forward. Because to me, that's like my white whale is like these dead spots where I'm like, so And this all goes back to like 2005, where I played in like a very frustrating Eberron game where like the game was perfectly fun. The people were fine. You know, I like playing with the group, but we spent one 4 hour session arguing over how much money we were going to spend to travel from one city to another city. Because every time it looked like we had to, oh, but what about food and water? Okay, we need to go, how much is that going to cost? You know, like, it's like I went to see the new Indiana Jones. It's just the red lines, you know, the map. Like, that's it. It's just 2 hours of like Indy's line going across the map, but then turning and switching. And, oh, now it's a boat. Oh, now it's a plane. Oh, now does he have enough money to afford like dinner on the cruise? No, he doesn't. So he has to like go. And it's just, oh my God, this is so boring. And so since then, you know, it's the sort of meta design. Like, I didn't really realize the problem until like the last like year or so, and then starting to try to address it. But like, if I get this to work, like, it'll be like, okay, I'm done, right? Like, I worked on fifth, and now if this works, I don't care if anyone buys it. I just get to run it. Like, that's literally my entire like self-design. Like, I just want a game I want to run. Yeah. And if I can get people to put money against getting it printed and get some cool art for it, awesome, like, success. So yeah, that's been my thing. I want a system that helps me GM by getting the players to stop arguing over what kind of car they want to drive when they kidnap like the weirdo guy on the corner.
Okay.
I will say that your entire motivation is 20 years ago. I played this one Eberron game, and I don't want that to ever happen to me again. Is the most accurate GM sort of design thing ever, because I've personally, what I've seen rules like, man, I wish I had this back in 2007. And it's like, this is the best rule ever, because that one thing had happened to me years ago with a guy I haven't talked to in the past 9 years. If he for some reason came back and we were playing that exact same game, that wouldn't work.
Exactly. No, that's the thing. Yeah, I think that's just, to me, that's what's fun about game design. It's always evolving. So yeah, so we'll see. You know, I'm gonna like try to write it up, get it on my Patreon, see if it's coming together. But for at least one weekend over the course of 3 games I ran, it worked beautifully. So I'm like, okay, I don't know if this is transferable. I hope it is. But I was just so, because the last time I ran it was also the players in this giant fight against all these undead. They're trying to like, and whenever like, I would just sit there and let them argue, and then my little alarm would go off, like, oh shit, right? And I'm pulling out all my 6-siders, shukka, and they're just like, no, like, we already have these weirdo like, bridesmaids attacking us, these undead bridesmaids, these veils, and like these bats, and like we don't want, And when I would roll no 6s, it was like, oh, like it was such a great moment of relief. But when I would roll like, oh, 2 more 6s, now the skeletal hounds are trying to smash their way into the window. Like you could just, everything was just good.
Okay. So you're rolling more than 1d6 every 10 minutes.
So,
okay. I was about to say, it's like on average, it's only one event an hour.
Yeah.
I mean,
so the idea is the way I ran this scenario, and this is also why I'm actually really liking this mechanic, because it's also very flexible. Like you can use it lots of different ways. For this scenario, it started with 1 die on the first 10 minutes, then 2, 3, 4. Then once I hit 6, then I just stayed at 6. And I always ran and rolled in the open. So the players, and that's something I changed. When I first rolled it, I was rolling it secretly. And I'm like, no, this is dumb. The players want to know that they're getting into trouble. The final session was like the where it was all working really well. Because the other thing you can do is in combat, if I roll 6s, I can like take extra turns with monsters, things like that. So they're fighting a banshee, and she like almost TPK'd them with her first banshee scream. And then it's like, well, if I roll 2 6s, she gets to scream again immediately. And they're like, then we will all die. So it was kind of fun to be like, okay, like, here's the rule. And
do you know what it reminds me of? Have you ever played Arkham Horror?
Yes. Oh, I love Arkham Horror. That's one of my absolute favorite games.
The Great Old One tracker, where every time certain events happen, like shops would close around the town, and as the tracker went up and it got closer to the Great Old One appeared, and bad things would happen around the map.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a similar mechanic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's because I love Arkham Horror. It's a lot of board games have this solved because they know, like, especially story ones, like, oh yeah, you have to advance the story mechanically, right? Because players, if possible, and I think this is a root problem, at least my experience running games, players treat time as like a completely like afterthought of a resource. Like, we'll argue for 30 minutes over, moped or scooter. Oh, it's really important we talk about this, right? Like, no, like we only have 2 hours a week to play. Stop acting like this, right? Like,
but then at the end, they're mad at you that they didn't get anything done that session, and you're like, guys, I was literally sitting there the whole time, trying not to gouge my eye out with a pencil while you debated moped versus scooter. So
Yes, and Shadow Dark does get around it.
Yeah.
Because the torches burn in real time.
Yeah.
So eventually it will go out. Sometimes we had the week we've been playing Shadow Dark for a year, and the other week we had one go out in the middle of a combat, and so we were just plunged in darkness, and then you do every roll then at a disadvantage. So lighting a torch is a roll with disadvantage. So that's why you're meant to have multiple torches on the go in case if one goes out and you still got this one. But when you're plunged in darkness, bad things happen.
Yeah.
It's a mechanic that works, actually.
No, and it was because it surprised me how much of an effect it had on play for something that I thought was a pretty light touch. But it's just, now the player's at least cognizant of the fact they didn't want to waste time. So, yeah. So I'm encouraged by it. We'll see where it goes.
Okay. We've got a couple of kind of a bit more generic questions. But then we'll move on to Wizards of the Coast and Chaosium, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Do you want to ask your first one, the one you got left now at the top?
Oh, okay.
Seth?
This is from RPG Lump. Just remember that song, Lump? She's Lump.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are stuck in a 30-foot deep pit. You have access to only the items that rhyme with your surname. How do you escape?
Oh, wow. My Mearls, not pearls. So I get a giant pile of pearls which I climb up on. So what else? Pearls? No, not so much. See, this is tricky. My name does not rhyme with an abundance of things. I guess I could hurls myself, but that doesn't.
It does. I mean, what are young Amazonians?
Yeah.
They're girls.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, girls. Yeah, like a bunch of
The girls could hit you up.
Well, you use your
pyramid.
pearls to get the girls so they can reach down and you can use your curls to pull you out.
Yeah, if I ever did curls, I'd have enough upper body strength to pull myself up. Yeah, an earl, maybe an earl, like the Earls of England would come and, fund my.
That's where you got
escape.
the pearls from.
Exactly, yeah. So there we go. And again, the earls would provide pearls to hire the girls to use their curls to pull me out. Which is pretty inefficient.
We got there in the end.
If my last name was just like Nope, well, I just use my pearls. But
Okay, I've got one here. I'm curious about what you think of Dragonbane, which basically repackages fantasy BRP for a new audience with several interesting mechanical tweaks. Was it an inspiration for the decision to go forward with the new Rune Quest?
I don't know if I think it influenced the new Rune Quest in the sense we could see someone in this space. Like there's, fantasy games that are non-D&D, having some success. Personally, I love the game. I ran it. The first time I think
everyone I know who's played it, runs it, loves it.
But it's just there's something about the hardcover. I wish I could find it here. Okay, I have the bestiary here. I own almost everything for it. I got one of the campaign they did, the Path of Glory, around here. But there's something about that rule book. The size of it is just like the perfect size for a TTRPG core rule book. Yeah. And the art and everything. And what I love, so I like the core system, and it's funny. It's like, okay, we can't use a D20 because, they already have done that. So we can't steal that. We have to stick with percentile dice. But I think the other folks at Chaos would want to do that. We would want to stick with percentiles. But yeah, I really enjoyed running it. And I really like the approach to like the monsters always hitting, like where it's just like, okay, like a random bandit rolls, it makes an attack skill, but the giant spider just rolls to see how much damage it's going to do to you. And then you have to try to block and everything. So I think it's a pretty clever way to make monsters feel really monstrous. And I think I ran 3 of the scenarios in the box set. It's another one where I just love the box set comes with like 10 adventures. There's plenty of content there to play through. And I love the visuals. And I think it's a really good take on, taking BRP, but tweaking it over to a 20-sider. I like the approach to Boons and Banes. That works pretty well. There's a reason why in 5th edition, there's, technical reasons why we don't stack up stuff, but I think it works for this system. And I'm trying to think what the other, the only challenge I have with it was I wish it just had a little bit more of a fleshed out setting, because I feel like the misty, it's the mist veil. I know it's super misty. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else. I wish like maybe if they dropped like 2 of the adventures and just gave a bit more like monster, wanting monster tables, a little more geography and a little bit more like here's how to add your own spin on things. That's the only thing I miss about it from that core box. but I love the art. The mechanics are super easy to use, super fun, and it's it's one of those things where like I ran it for my friends who normally play D&D, and they totally got it. It was pretty easy, to move them over. So yeah, no, I adore Dragonbane. I think I do literally own everything except for the free RPG Day adventure. I think they ran out before I got to my store to get that. So, but yeah, just got it for my birthday. Got it right here. Got Path of Glory, so I got to read through this. And
I like the art of it.
Yeah,
it harkens back to a different time for me.
Yeah.
See, I'm also a fan of Vesson.
Oh, yeah,
you are as well, Seth.
I love that game.
Yeah.
I almost feel like if you were to ask someone who didn't know anything about TTRPGs, but maybe they heard of D&D, what do you think D&D looks like? I think they would describe something that looks like Dragonbane. In terms of like the art and the feel and like just like it's this like one book that has everything.
Okay, I've got a more general question here from Surgeon Doom. I think he must be Doctor Doom's superior. What new games do you have high hopes for in the long run? Which ones do you see as having the potential staying power of the likes of D&D, Rune Quest, and Call of Cthulhu?
Yeah, I think we're going to. So the big one, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, is Drawsteel from MCDM, because I think that
is a terrible name for a game, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm bad at naming things, so I can't complain too much. But I think it's really interesting that they are going for a bit more of a tactical role-playing game. And I love that they're developing the app at the same time. And so I think there's something really potentially there. One of the things I think is interesting is we're seeing everyone kind of take that D&D baseline and like go, oh, more complicated or less complicated or more focused. And so I think Drawsteel is the kind of game that could get an audience that like wants that crunchier game, that more tactical game. And those games are hard to develop. And so I think what's really interesting is like they're using the fact that they raised enough money, over the years, and they obviously had their big, multi-million-dollar Kickstarter for the game itself, to like bring on game designers. They hired a game designer who has a background like working at Blizzard, like real heavy system designer. And so I think that's really cool to see someone raise this money and build something that feels like it's meant to be very sustainable. Like, okay, we're going to develop an app. And it's funny because when I GM, I tend to like lighter games, but this feels like, we're talking to a friend of mine, like, oh, this is a game I want to play. I want to play Drawsteel because I like that tactical thing when I'm a player. So, and I adore Flea Mortals and the companion adventure book they did. What's the name of the adventure book? Oh, I'm blanking on it. It's already here on my shelf. The Where Evil Lives. This is I love the adventures in here. So I'm super looking forward to, like, based on their 5e stuff, I think they've done some cool stuff. I love their monster book. I love their adventure book. So yeah, and I'm intentionally kind of not following it because I want to buy it and then just react to it like as a product. So plus I just don't have the bandwidth to follow a game development right now. So I think, yeah, that one, I think of the current games, I'm curious to see what happens with Daggerheart. Like, it's kind of an interesting test for like Critical Role. Like, do people watch Critical Role because they're role players or because they just like watching entertainment? And I don't think we really know the answer to that. So
we'll soon find out, won't we?
Yeah. Where obviously Drawsteel is like, yeah, you watch Matt Colville because you're a gamer. So
it's funny because at Gen Con last year, I was at Gen Con, and me and Seth met up as well, didn't we? Played Pendragon together.
Cool. Yep. Well, yeah, I played Pendragon. I
sat in the other room for most.
Sat in the other room.
Yeah, we actually played with Ben Milton, Rune Quest and Beast, and we explained to him how the rules work, and he kind of went, so this is a game that plays you. And there's never as a truer thing been said about a game than that about Pendragon. But anyway, on one of the floors, they had various display cabinets, and it was like, new Magic the Gathering stuff, and, the new Pathfinder, and they had the MCDM one. It was completely empty. Which I thought was the most ironic thing ever, considering he made all that money and nothing has come out yet.
Yeah. But yeah, they're taking the time with it, so we'll see what I'll see where it goes. But I guess I have high hopes for it.
That's good. Okay, so let's get more about your game building philosophy then. I've got one here from Chase Cushman. When building a new system, how do you balance innovation with familiarity?
you have to know what you want your game to do. So like for me, like, I'm developing this game. Well, I want a game where I can run really fun sessions in an hour by getting rid of all these dead spots. Like, oh, if I kind of have my mechanic. So that's a good example to me of like my philosophy of like, okay, I'm going to introduce this very new thing because there isn't anything else out there that does this. Otherwise, I'm basically just stripping 5th edition D&D for parts to fill in everything else. Because like, do I want to like reinvent the skill system? No. Do I want to do something that's like, die roll and add a number? Like, yeah, that works. And I don't want to like expend any of my complexity capital or testing time on proving out something else. So I think basically it comes down to like, how much time do you have and what's the most important part of your game to you? And I think the more important that part is, like, the more it should be like that's something that's new and interesting. Because you're not going to convince someone that something's important if it looks like just like something from some other game they've seen. That's kind of a tough thing to pull off. And I think you'll also kind of know like you're on the right track with a game if you can see like, oh, here's the cool thing that I'm adding that I haven't seen elsewhere, or it's a new spin on it. And you want to make your game as easy to play, at least it's my opinion. And so you're best off like focusing the novelty on that new thing, because that's what's going to sell the game. So the process of learning it's going to be fun for the player because that's what they're interested in. So it's exciting. And then everything else, just make it as easy to use as possible. And so that's where, using familiar mechanics like a die pool, like a D&D style roll a die and add a number, things like that. You mentioned, Vaesen, like that's a game that was pretty easy for me to pick up because the system's pretty simple, right? You're rolling a pool of dice and looking for successes. But what makes it interesting is like when you run into the supernatural and you trigger like, that fight or flight, mechanic of, I liked how they approach things like, well, it's not sanity. It's just you have to pick one of these 3 things or 2 things to do because you kind of lost control of your character. Like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. And the setting and the castle and how that all fit together. If you're not familiar with the game, basically you are a member of this society that's reforming and you start with a castle. And so then you can get upgrades to it. And, and also like when I ran an adventure, I could spend a lot of time researching Sweden and that time period. And pulling out, I think it was recent up there were photographs, I think. Because it's like turn of the century, isn't it? I'm trying to think. Or like 19...
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of Victoriana almost, isn't
it?
Yeah,
I want to see either art or photos or something, but it was kind of nice. I didn't have to spend a lot of time learning the game because the system was pretty straightforward, so I could put a lot of it in prep. I ran the game online, so I wanted to have like some visuals and stuff to kind of get across the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I think think about what's important to you and what you want the game to do and put your novelty there. And then otherwise, make it easy on yourself and your players. Just use tried and true stuff.
Okay, this is from Patrick Mullen. Your stated philosophy involves a game master-centric approach. How are you enabling that via the products you advocate and support at Chaosium? Are you backing more setting-type products and campaign books that enable GMs, as opposed to rules, tweaks, rebrandings advertised as new hotness? And I don't know why I did the quote marks there because you can't see me.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is, and we just had a meeting with this morning, is to think about, for game masters, what are you doing like in a product that enables them to create and run adventures that they couldn't run with the product you already given to them? And then how can you build design structures that are easy to use but allow for evocative content? So I always like to use the idea of Magic the Gathering as an example of this. Like a Magic the Gathering card has a very clear structure to it. But within that structure, you can do anything, right? Like you can do Lord of the Rings. You can do, whatever IPs are adding to it. You can, each set's wildly different. So then the idea is when you're thinking of, like, say, Rune Quest as an example, like what's kind of the core adventure structure we want to support? And then literally support it in the sense of like, okay, like here's how your adventures usually go. This happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. So do we have the right content to enable each of those steps? So as an example, because you kind of call it, Rune Quest is kind of in flight right now, so you just Call of Cthulhu as an example. The Haunting is like this iconic Call of Cthulhu scenario. And I think one of the reasons why Call of Cthulhu has never had a massive mechanical redefinition is because the Haunting, like it's adventures first. So like as long as you can run the Haunting with the adventure, with the rules, and you can run it easily, like that's a sign you're on the right direction. So when you're thinking of like, okay, so what's GM support look like? Well, if I want to give you a mystery style approach, to gaming, I need to make sure the characters have the right skills, but they're not so powerful that it invalidates your ability to build a mystery. So D&D is notorious for like, oh, there's so many spells that just make investigation pointless, right? You cast ESP, you cast Speak with Dead. There's a billion spells that do this. So it's really hard.
Yeah.
Like, as a GM, it's work to make this all happen. Whereas in Call of Cthulhu, it's much simpler because the player's like, well, I'm a librarian. I have library use, so I should go to the library. Oh, great. I, as a GM, know to put information in the library, things like that. It's a bit more structured. So thinking about character design as giving players arrows pointing like areas they should try to go, and then making that clear to the GM so they know, okay, when I'm writing my scenario, here's what I should anticipate. So actually, I'll say that I'll use Rune Quest as the example, but I don't know if this is where it'll end up, but here's an example. So Rune Quest, like the typical scenario might be, okay, you start in New Pavis, you're in the city, and here are the factions in the city. So here's how you can tie the players to the characters to the factions. So when you write a scenario, think about how does each faction intersect with a scenario, and what kind of support can they give the characters? Because the characters will actually say, okay, we have to go do this thing. Well, I'm going to go talk to my friends at the temple, or I'm going to go talk to my friends at the royal court because I have connections there to find out what's going on. So that gives you some easy endpoints, to give players information. Okay, next we need to travel to the adventure location. Well, in Rune Quest, we're going to assume you're traveling while you're mounted. And this is why this is going to feel different from, say, dungeon exploration, because if you're all mounted, that means now if you get into a fight, it's going to be mounted combat. Or it might be more we're going to try to evade people. Okay, so let's make sure we have really simple but easily usable chase rules and really easy to use but fun rules for mounted combat. And then give you some monsters, some enemies that are essentially mounted, whether it's actually literally people on mounts, or hey, this is a creature that's fast enough that in the mounted phase, it can be an enemy. And then, okay, now you get to the adventure site. Okay, now the characters got here on horseback. We need to make sure we've designed these adventures and show you how to do this with the rules and with the presentation. Say, okay, this is why the players don't ride their mounts into the dungeon, right? Like, because, I'd love to ride my horse because then I got my lance. Like, well, okay, our rules will say things like, this is treacherous ground. If you're a biped, no problem. You can pick your way through the ruins. But like, a quadruped has to make a check each round. Oh, and if it fails, it falls and gets hurt. And now it can't move. Okay, now what do you need to do with your horse? Things like that. Now that might be too simulation, but whatever. But just the idea is we're going to break into the system a very clear thing that says this is why you don't ride your horse into the rubble. No, you ride your horse to the edge, you found the ruin, now you dismount, and then you have to go in on foot because it's just not practical. And our game accounts for that because we've kind of thought about here's our iconic, the adventures we're going to enable. Okay, now we're in the dungeon. Okay, let's think about our rules for lighting, not in terms of simulation, but in terms of gameplay. Like, okay, what's it mean to have my torch out? Kind of like the Shadow Dark thing. So we're thinking about it in terms for GM support, but the system isn't just there to simulate things. The system is there to make it easy for the GM to write scenarios. And we explain to you as a GM, here's what to think about, because here's what our system does. So think about lighting and use lighting. Have monsters hiding, have things hidden away. Like, use light and dark as your thing, right? Like, because that's something that's going to be important when you're underground. Use chaos or the lunars as factions we have available. And here's why they would do this. And here's how you can use them. So to basically try to build as much of a structure so you can just kind of take your ideas and just map them to what we've given you. It's almost like, you remember like games like Battletech and Car Wars back in the day where like they gave you like unit construction rules? I used to love like designing mechs or cars. Like, oh, cool. Like, it's just a fun system to play with. Now, I think you don't want to be so overly prescriptive, like that you're spending points and stuff. But just really thinking about the rules and how they translate to adventure design and how we can make that easier for the GM. Because I think so much of what, like, especially D&D and, and games like that, it's like, it's so hard to do things like the players, like, oh, the guy gets all this damage bonus when he's on his horse. So, of course, they want to bring the horse into the dungeon. But I need to make the hallways in my dungeon really wide because there's ogres here. And I can't have doors the ogres can't fit through. But if the ogres can fit through the doors, then the horse can fit through the doors. And you just end up with all this like, it's so annoying, or like I'm trying to jump through all these hoops to make this thing work because this character's broken when they're on their horse. Or no, everyone just rides a horse in because horses have 50 hit points. Just using them as like barriers, right? Like, it's just
meat shields essentially,
exactly, right? So it's like, all right, so trying to really think about in terms of the practicalities running.
I mean, it's funny because the whole quadruped thing makes perfect sense until you then get the actually Rune Quest person who talks about the ostrich side. Okay, well, let's quickly touch on the Fire Mike Mearls.
Okay, yeah.
Looking back now, is there anything you'd have done differently?
The tricky thing is, I think what I wish I had done was really pushed Wizards, the company, to issue like a public statement. So when all that stuff happened, to be clear to everybody, like, I was accused of a lot of stuff. I didn't do any of that stuff. And like Wizards investigated pretty thoroughly. Like they brought in an outside law firm to ask me a bunch of questions, and they cleared me. And there was some talk about, okay, would they issue a public statement basically saying, hey, like we investigated him, and he's in the clear. And at the time, I thought, well, does that really do anything? Will people trust wizards? Will they believe it? And looking back, I'm like, yeah, I think I should have just been much more insistent, or even just said something myself, rather than just letting it go. Because that's the time I thought I decided to stop using social media. Like that was my kind of protest at work. I'm like, okay, if you're not going to say anything in my favor, I'm just not going to use social media. Like I went to E3 for Larian because I had agreed to do that. And after that, I stopped using social media. I stopped doing press appearances because I was just like, I'm not going to go out and be a spokesperson unless they're going to like say something publicly to back me. And I think looking back, that's probably a little too passive aggressive of me. I should have just been more like, hey, like you are going to say something or I'm going to say something. If I'm going to say something, here's what I'm going to say. And so that's the main thing. Just to be clear with people, like, hey, here's what actually happened. It was, well, not even that. Like, I don't think I wanted to get into the details. Like, well, this has happened, and this person said this, and this is actually what happened. Like, I don't think that would really do anything. I just think I wanted people to know, like, I've been accused of this stuff. And, like, there was, like, this idea of, like, well, I just want my, like, what I went through, like, at work to be clear. Like, this company investigated me. I would have been fired if I had done even, like, a tenth of what people accused me of doing. So, I mean, clearly I worked another 5 years at the company because it was 2019 and happening, kind of bubbled up in 2020. But yeah, so I think I would have been a bit more, upfront about saying, here's what has happened. Here's why I'm still at Wizards. Here's why you don't see me on social media. I mean, obviously that may have been awkward because I would have been kind of quasi dragging the company I was working for. Like they don't want to say anything, but I will. And here's what happened. Like none of this stuff happened. But I also, the thing that kept me from doing anything like that was a sense of relief that I wasn't on social media anymore. Because being like the guy in charge of D&D, at least that's what people thought, was really tiring. And I was getting kind of sick of it.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
It was very tiring.
So it was kind of liberating. And then, I moved to Magic in 2020. And that was also kind of nice to start like learning, picking up a new skill set, expanding my horizons. But it's funny, when I got laid off and I was thinking, okay, what should I do next? I went through this phase where I was like, I don't want to do TTRPGs at all. Just stay away, But then I ended up back in it, and then I started using Twitter again in December, and it's been really fun. So then I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I should have been so quick to just like, I'm done with this. It was also time, it was 2019. I just like my mother had passed away. There was a bunch of other stuff that had happened. So it was also just kind of like, why am I putting up with all this stuff? Yeah. Like I just, don't want to, because, it was just, It was not the one thing that struck me in looking back is like, I don't think people are doing, like, I think there are people who are doing this in good faith since, someone said this person did something terrible. And so I want to like, help out by going after them. But there are a lot of people who came after me really hard who were like, and then a year later, like they were exposed for doing terrible things themselves. And like, so it's also part of me just like, if this is like TTRPG culture, I don't want to be a part of this. Like, this is a mess. Like I'm seeing some of the worst actors come out the loudest. And I had people that I interacted with who like, they know I apologize to them. And then they're online trying to get clout. Like, this is what he did to me. And like, I'm not even going to try to argue this. Like, it's so clearly, this is just people trying to make a name for themselves. So and part of it too is like, there are bad actors out there. So it's like, well, maybe this is also helps kind of like put a lid on stuff. Like if people could come after me, am I setting a good example by like suing people or something like that? Like, I don't think that's helping like the online culture. Like, yeah, I just couldn't really see a great path forward. I mean, my thing was I just want to keep making games. And I think organically, I think over time, what I underestimated was I think there were a lot of people who were generally like, I don't see any evidence that this happened. I see a lot of hearsay. And so when I did kind of come back to social media, like people were happy to see me back. Because I've been going to conventions and I never had any problems there. And I noticed when I posted some stuff on Twitter about like, you should, in RPGs, you should risk character death. And I said something like about safety. And what I meant was like, your character's safe, not that you're safe. And some people interpret that as like, you're coming out against safety tools. But like, it's like, I don't want to live this life of like, it's like, the secret police are our fellow like social media users, and so everything we say we have to like sift through and make sure it's not incorrect or it could offend someone. Like I think that like one thing that I think I've noticed is when I jumped off of social media, I got the sense people didn't really want to engage authentically on social media. I think that's something like the stakes in D&D had gotten so high, like, you know, a lot of people thinking, I'm going to make a lot of money doing this. And then you got a lot of like, you know, people sniping at each other, trying to push each other out of the space. And I think now it almost feels like people are a little bit over that. I think they're more open to just arguing with each other and engaging a bit more freely. And so that's been kind of good to see too. So yeah, so you know, I think maybe it was a good thing at the end that I didn't try to come out aggressively, because obviously you don't know what's going to happen. And I can't complain about the results of my life, like, you know, like,
we can work for chaos here.
Yeah, exactly. I might be, you know, just, you know, whether I'm actually dead on, you know, Broadway in New York City. But yeah, I mean, other than, you know, that, it's like, I really, you know, I'm enjoying my career and everything. So it's like, do I really want, like, what's the, like, my wife once, she asked me one point, like, what's the point? Like, what's the end game? So if you're to start going around trying to disprove all this stuff, like, you know, say, hey, here's what actually happened. Okay, like, but the people who are really going after you don't seem to care about what's true. They just like going after you or someone like you. Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, okay, that's kind of also what we're dealing with. So, and you know, you said the blowback has been, I have not noticed much. There's a few things people try to stir up, but it's, yeah, it just doesn't seem to get the traction it once did.